Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Tech Tuesday by BitCube. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Justin Swart, and today I would like to show you guys how to use multiple SSH keys. This could be for a single account or for multiple accounts. Today's scenario will just basically be showing you how to use different SSH keys that link to different GitHub accounts. Um, but after going through all the scenarios, you'll see that it's fairly easy just to use this to add as many SSH keys as you want. So before we begin, um, GitHub does have a piece of documentation that's really nice for adding SSH keys. The only thing is, unfortunately, they don't show you how to use multiple SSH keys. So it's generally just used for a single computer using a single SSH key to connect to a network. But I'll try and ease the terror of using multiple SSH keys. So usually that could be a hassle, um, but there are really easy ways of handling it, and hopefully after this video you will be able to set up your environment with multiple SSH keys if the need be. So yeah, let's get started. Okay, before we actually get started, I just want to say that this is not a video explaining what SSH is or what SSH keys are. As we go through, I'll give general descriptions of what everything is, but it's not going to be too in depth. This is just basically to get you to be able to use multiple SSH keys on your single computer. And yeah, so first thing is, if you just want to use a single SSH key, you can still follow everything that I do in this video. But generally, it would probably just be better if you go to this GitHub documentation and just follow everything there. It's pretty simple to understand, but I'll try and simplify it even more. So I will be linking this in the video description, but yeah, for now we won't need that anymore. So let's get started. Before we jump into all the practical stuff, I just want to explain the flow that we're going to be going through. So since we are going to be using multiple SSH keys, our first steps will be to actually generate these keys on our device. And then after that, we'll just add those identities. As we add them in the practical, I'll explain a bit more on what happens there. And then after we've added everything, we're going to generate a config file, which is going to point to these different identities, in which case our scenario will just be two different GitHub accounts. But these could also, like I said, be one account that has multiple SSH keys on it. It doesn't really matter, as long as you just follow the flow and the structure of what I'm going to be showing in the video. You should be 100% fine. And yeah, so the reason we're going to be generating everything first before actually cloning our repositories is that if you just generate a single key, clone a repository, everything will probably work nice and smooth. But the moment afterwards that you add another SSH key, and then you try and clone a repository, you might get errors, and that's where people usually get stumped and give up at that point. But yeah, that's just the reason that we're not going to be doing it one by one. We're going to be doing everything in bulk right now. So yeah, okay, let's get started. First of all, preemptively, I just created two GitHub testing accounts for us. So the first one is this guy, testing GitHub 779. That's the only thing that was available, so I just used that. So first off, we'll start by creating an SSH key and linking it to this GitHub profile. So to do that, first let's go to our terminal side. Okay, awesome. so now that we're here, okay, another thing is this tutorial is going to be on a Mac, and there are slight differences when using Mac and Windows. For example, Windows is kind of simpler to use, especially if you use the git bash CLI. Um, then you won't really have any issues. It's a lot simpler than using it on Mac. The only reason for that is because Mac uses a keychain to store your SSH keys passphrase. If you are actually using a passphrase, in this example, we won't be using one, but that's just to add an extra layer of security. So for Mac, you actually have to specify a few extra flags when generating your keys to save that passphrase in your Mac OS keychain. But I will show you how to do that, or I'll show you the flags at least. There's not really anything other than just adding those flags and a little bit of config properties to add those passphrases to the keychain. And after you've done that, you can just forget about it as long as you remember your passphrase. Otherwise, you won't really be able to connect anymore. But okay, yeah, so first of all, let's get started by just generating a SSH key using the built-in SSH commands provided by us. On Mac, it's already built in. Windows is also usually built in, but if I doubt that there would ever be a case that you would not have the SSH tools installed on your device. But yeah, let's get started. So first of all, before generating anything and adding anything to our SSH, I usually like to go to the actual SSH folder. So on most devices, that would usually just be on your root directory. And then inside there should be a .ssh folder that you can go into. So we will be doing everything from here. Reason being that when you do generate SSH keys, the paths are relative. So if you're in the SSH directory, you don't need to specify any weird directories to generate your keys. All your keys will just be saved inside of this .ssh directory by itself. If you don't have this directory, you can always just create it yourself and then just cd into that. So first of all, let's start by creating our SSH key for this testing GitHub 779 account. So first of all, we just want to go to settings on our profile, and here you should see that there is a section called SSH and GPG keys. You can just go to there. This is the prior one I used for testing, but we're not going to be using that at all. So I'll just delete that. Actually, I think I do have a few here. Yep. So we'll just remove all of these files that I generated previously. We'll just do that. Delete that one. Delete that one. And then delete that one. Cool. See. Okay, cool. Now everything is removed from my SSH directory. I'll explain this command a little bit later as well, but I just want to delete my previously used keys. That's how you do that. Awesome. Okay, so now let's start fresh. So here you can see that this account has no SSH keys currently on it. We'll just click on the new SSH key button right here. Our title will be personal computer 1, just to denote that this is the number 1 PC that we're using. After that, you can see here there's a section that asks you for a SSH key. So yeah, there's no way of automatically generating these. You have to do it through the CLI. I think the GitHub actual desktop app allows you to do a lot more easier, but it's always nice doing it through the CLI and actually having control over everything that you're doing. So let's get started by generating this key. Okay, so here in our terminal, currently we are in the .ssh folder. That's where we're going to do all of our work. So to generate an SSH key, there is a built-in command called ssh keygen. And if you just want to see what flags it has, all of this cool stuff you can do, you can just go --help. And then here you can see all the stuff that you can use. For us, we are just going to be using the -t. Now, -t basically just means the encryption type that you want to use to encrypt your connection. So we will be using this ED25519 encryption, which is the one that my Mac at this point currently supports. If you are on older MacBook OS versions, or maybe like older Windows operating systems, you would possibly get an error when trying to generate your key using this encryption. But that's really easy to just evade. Just use RSA. So you will be 100% fine using either of these encryption methods. In our case, we will just be using this one. The only other command that we will be using, let's see if it's here. Here. The -c one, in this case it says comment, but in this case that would just be the identity that we're referring to. So in most cases, just using your email that you use for the account is a good enough identification. Since when you are doing like pushing to a GitHub repo and stuff, it'll use that your GitHub config credentials and try and match it with that identity. So just using the correct emails that you assign to your accounts should suffice. So yeah, let us get started. So first we will use ssh keygen. After that we will say -t, which is our encryption method, and then we will be using the ED25519 encryption method. Then we will just say -c, and inside of here we will just use our email. I don't want to write this thing out from scratch. I'll just copy and paste it. Cool. That at gmail.com. So just to note, when you are typing these emails and when you're working in your configs and naming all of that, it has to be perfectly done perfectly. So if you do have a spelling mistake in here, like if I left it as COOM, after adding these keys, I wouldn't be able to actually push to my repository or anything like that, since it'll be mismatched. So you have to be very careful when adding these names. They have to be perfectly added, no mistakes inside there. So yeah, let's get started by just creating this SSH key for ourselves. So you'll see it'll say it's generating a public-private key pair, which is just the one that we use for our identity. It's called an identity file that we just basically say this computer has authorization to connect to this SSH network. And then the private one that gets generated is that key that we're going to add to GitHub, which is saved in a .pub file. But that doesn't matter. It just contains a key that's basically your password that you're going to be using. Also, you're only going to be adding this once and using it once, and then afterwards you're not going to have to worry about it again. Okay, cool. So now it's just asking us to enter a file to save this key to. Let's just call the file name the default ID 25519, but then we'll just add this as first, just to denote that this is our first identity, linking to our first account. So we'll add that. It'll ask us for a passphrase. You can add a passphrase here, but I just really don't want to. There's no reason for me to use one. I'm going to delete everything like afterwards again. But yeah, you can just add one if you want to. I'm not going to. Enter same passphrase again. Mine is empty, and then you'll see that it has generated a identification, which is just this file, and a public key, which is in this case the pub file, which is why it's denoted as public key. So and then you also just get some nice random art that's generated for you. Don't have to worry about that. Okay, so now after we've actually generated our key, if we do a list in our .ssh folder, we'll see that a id ed2 whatever we named the file, an identity file has been created for us, and a public key. Now this public key is the one that we're going to be adding to GitHub, and this identity file is the one that we're going to be referencing in our configs, so that we can actually we're actually enabled to connect to our SSH network. So okay, yeah, this is the first SSH key that we're generating. It's basically just commands that you have to memorize to get to this point. So what we want to do now is take this public key and add it to our GitHub repository. That's easy enough. On Mac, you can just use a nice command, pb copy, and then specify what you want to copy. So that I want to copy the public key. If you're on Windows, you could probably just go cat whatever that thing was, public key, and then just physically, copy it from there. That doesn't matter. So now that we have it copied, we're just going to paste that onto our GitHub account, and then we'll go add SSH key, and then we're going to repeat these exact same steps for our second account. So I'll just quickly go through that. I'm not going to explain really what I'm doing now, because it's the exact same steps we just used to generate the SSH key. We'll just go into our account, go to our settings. I'll just copy this account again because I don't want to remember typing it out. We go to the SSH section. I'm just going to delete my testing key that I used. Ignore this, that you didn't see anything. There we go. We'll go there. We'll call this personal computer 1 since we're using the exact same computer to connect to this account with the exact with its own SSH key. And now we need to follow the steps again so that we can create an SSH key for ourselves. Again, easy. SSH keygen, specify encryption. Sorry, there we go. Just use our identification, which is that at gmail.com. Cool, we have that. Nice. We'll call this also same standards to 5519, but then we'll just call this our second identity file. There we go. Passphrase, that doesn't matter. Don't care about that either. We just have an empty one. There we go. And it's another nice art image made for us. Cool. So now we go just clear everything, and I'll list my SSH directory. And as you can see now, we actually do have our second identity file added right here, and also our second public key added, which is this one. So again, we just want to pb copy. We just want to copy that second public key. Awesome. And that's the one that we are going to reference right here. Add SSH key. And there we go. So it's a never used key. That's nice. We didn't care about that. And now we can go sign out and sign in to our first account so that we can clone our repository. And this is basically where the interesting things are going to start happening now. Okay, so now that we've actually created our public keys and our identity files, so just a bit of best practice stuff here now before we get into this section. Also, just some system limitations. So, if you are using a MacBook that runs the OS 10.12.2 and lower, if you just use a single SSH key, you do not have to worry about adding a config file to your SSH folder. But since the updates after 10.12.2, you are explicitly forced to create a config file, and this is just on Mac though. So if you are getting any errors with your SSH connections and you see that your OS is above 10.12.2, you are going to be forced to add this config file that we're going to be adding in this next section. But that you only have to worry about if you use a single SSH key. If you use multiple SSH keys, you are immediately forced to have that config file to denote between the two SSH keys and basically control your connections from there. And also on Windows, everything that I've done here so far is exactly what you're going to be doing on Windows. No differences at all. The differences are only going to be coming when we add the SSH key and also inside of our config file. But for Windows as well, if you just generate a single SSH key for use, you don't have to at all worry about creating a config file. That's handled for you by Windows. So yeah, let's get moving on. So our next step would basically be to create that config file. So inside of this SSH folder, we'll just create a file called config. There we go. And then I'll just use nano as an editor to manipulate this file. Here we go. So inside of this config file, and this is where we are going to be controlling our connections for SSH. So if just to get that out of the way, if you are just using a single SSH key and like I said, you're on the Mac OS versions, the latest versions, you have to have this file. It's compulsory. If you are using that single SSH key, the only thing you need to do is go host. So this is basically just any host connecting through that SSH key. You can just specify anything. For our multi SSH key use, we're definitely going to need to specify a host. And then inside of there, you can just say add keys to agent. Yes. So this just adds whatever goes through this connection to your SSH agent, which is the basically your control point for where your incoming and outgoing connections. Also, other than that, so now if you have used a passphrase when you generated your SSH key on Mac, you would be forced to go use keychain and then say yes. If you don't use a passcode, you don't have to worry about that section at all. It's not required, but and also on Windows, not required at all. This is just specifically for Mac with a passphrase on your SSH key. You need to specify that in order for that passphrase to be saved in the macOS keychain. If you don't do that, you will always get an identity issue and you will basically not be able to use your repos at all, because there will be a passcode error. And then the last one that you need to worry about adding, okay, so we'll just remove this since we did not use a passphrase. But the last section in there you need to add is identity file. Now that's easy enough to understand. That's just going to be where your identity file is saved for the one that you used. So if you just generate a single SSH key, that would just be wherever your SSH folder is located, and then the reference to that identification file. In my case, it's ed 25519. If you just generated one without naming it, this would probably just be what it's called, but mine would just be first. So then anytime I use get actions now through SSH, it'll immediately go into this host file, add the key to the agent, and then check where is my what identity file should it be using. So it'll use this one. So basically, on this device now currently, if I just leave everything as is like this, I would forever be able to use this testing GitHub account without any issues. But the moment I switch out accounts, I won't ever be able to connect there. But yeah, this is now we're going to get to the interesting part, and that is actually changing this config file to use multiple accounts. So that is actually easy enough. So first of all, at our host section, we are basically just going to this when GitHub, when you're using your SSH commands for GitHub, that's cloning or committing or anything like that. If you or specifically cloning, actually, we'll get to when committing and pushing your work and all of that stuff. But specifically for cloning, when you clone into GitHub repository using SSH, if you are using a host that's not specified, it will immediately go into this config file and search your first host entry and use that identity file to connect or to at least try and establish a connection to that SSH network. So that'll make a little bit more sense after we've cloned our repos. But I just want to, we just wanted to say that so you guys could know. So first of all, our host is going to be github.com. This could be anything from GitLab or Bitbucket or whatever you're using to save your repositories. Cool. And inside of here, we're just going to specify a host name. Oh, okay. So this host, how we are going to be specifying them is host is going to be github.com, and then we would just like to also add, since we're using multiple accounts, the username we're using for that account. So in this case, we will just say dash, and then whatever our username is, testing GitHub. So dash testing GitHub 779. Our host name would just be github.com. There we go. And then our next one would be the default one, add keys to agent, and say yes. There's already an issue. There we go. Just make a space there. Awesome. And then our last section would just be our identity file. So identity file. And we'll just specify the identity file linking to this username. Simple enough. That's just going to there. It's in our SSH folder. It was called ID ed 25519, and we just made it simple, so we just called it first. That's easy enough. So that is our going to be our connection for our first SSH key. And now we're going to be doing the exact same thing just for our secondary account. So it's called host github.com. Sorry, this account is called GitHub testing. Very creative. 45. Look, I just want to make sure. I don't want to get these names incorrect now. Let's just see really quickly. Testing GitHub 779. Testing GitHub 779. There we go. GitHub testing 45. GitHub testing 45. Awesome. Okay, we've got them correct. Now we just go about doing the same thing. We add our host name, which is also just going to be github.com. So any connection coming in through github.com, that is what we support. Then after that, we would just like to add the keys to agent. Say yes, beautiful, and add our identity file. In this case, there in our SSH folder, it's ID ed 25519, and we made it simple. We just called it second. Cool. So these host names are basically very, very important, especially when you are cloning your repos, because you're going to have to reference these host names when you're cloning a repo. Otherwise, you won't have access to clone those repos. But that'll make sense now once we actually do get to cloning. So as long as your SSH config file just looks similar to this, just replaced with all of your own identity files and usernames, you should be good. Anyways, let's move on to the next steps. And also, you're always just going to have to do all of this once. So it's a big setup, but it pays off in the long term. Especially when you are someone who switches between accounts a lot on GitHub. So anyways, we're going to save this config file. Just make sure everything's saved correctly. Beautiful. Cool. So now our next step would basically be to run our SSH agent so that we can control incoming and outgoing connections, and then actually adding our SSH identities to this agent. And how we would go about doing that is just start the SSH agent. So we can do that by just saying ssh-agent, and we use the -s flag. That'll just start the SSH agent. See, there's a bunch of stuff that gets printed out. If you want to make this a little bit more readable, you can just go evaluate, use quotation marks, and then inside there, just what you want to evaluate, sorry, inside of these dollar brackets. Inside there, you can say SSH agent -s, and what this will do is only anything that gets echoed to the terminal, it'll just display that. So running that, yeah, you can just say see agent has started, and it's connected to PID whatever. You can use this PID to kill the SSH agent if you want, or maybe like ping it just to see if it's actually still connected. You can do whatever you want with that. We're not going to go into detail about that. Anyways, now that we have actually started our SSH agent, we would then like to go ahead and add our individual keys to this SSH agent. So to do that, it's also very easy. We'll just use a built-in command, say called ssh-add. So using ssh-add, we can add the flag -l just to see if we have any current connections already. So if we do that, you'll see no, the agent has no identities because we haven't added them any. And also, we'll get to that now after we've added one. So okay, now we want to just add an identity to the SSH agent. That's very simple. You just use the ssh-add command again, and now also again, just some system stuff that you have to note. If you are using Mac again, and you added a passphrase to your SSH agent, when adding it, you just need to have the -k flag so that it knows that this passphrase for this identity that you added is in the keychain on Mac. If you don't do that, when you add your identity file, it's not going to work. Also, just a macOS update from macOS 12 and up. The -k flag got deprecated, so you're not going to be able to use that anymore. You're going to have to use the dash use Apple keychain flag. So that's the one that got replaced with the dash K. You would just use that. On Windows, you don't have to worry about that. You can just do it exactly the way I'm doing it now, since I didn't add any passphrases. So let's add our first account identity file. So we can go ssh add. I'm already in the ssh folder, so I can just specify the identity, which is ed255, and we want to add the first one. There we go. So as you can see, identity added, the name of the identity, and then our actual identity reference that we're using, which is our email in this case. So there we go. If we go ssh add, and then we actually list everything, there we go. You can see that this is the exact one that we want listed. So also just a note, if you want to remove any older keys, or not keys, but identities. If you want to remove older keys, you're going to have to physically delete them out of your SSH folders or wherever they have been saved. If you want to remove those identities from your SSH agent, you would just go ssh-add-d. So that's simple enough to understand. It's just -d for delete. If you run that, all identities will be removed. So if I go ssh add and list, now I have 0 identities left. Okay, let me just clear this console so you guys can actually see everything. Also, let me just re-add that first identity. So obviously our next step would be just to add that second identity the exact same way. So we'll just go ssh add id ed blah blah blah, and we called it second. So we'll just add that, and as you can see now, we have our second account also added to our SSH agent. So if we do go and list everything, nice. You can see that we have both of these guys currently connected. So also, just to test our SSH connection, just at this point now, so that we can make sure that everything actually will connect correctly, we can go nano our config file. I just want to make sure that these names, you can see that this is our host name for the first account, this is our host name for our second account. How you can test your connections is easy enough. You can just go ssh-t and then specify those that you want to connect to. So in our case, we're going to be using the SSH format, which is git@github.com, and we want to specify our first account. So this is that host name that we added in the config. So we'll go testing GitHub 779, and we'll just run that. Just make sure everything works. If I didn't make any mistakes. There we go. See, no issues there. Hi, testing at GitHub, blah, 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 it references us by our username. You've successfully authenticated, but Git does not provide shell access, which is good. We don't want shell access from Git. We're just using this to manage our repositories. So now we want to test our second one. For that, we'll just go GitHub testing, which is our secondary account's name, or at least our secondary account's host name. We'll go there. So by doing this, you can basically see that your config file works perfectly. If you are able to connect through the SSH test channel here to your host name, the one that you specified in your config, if you are allowed to do that and you get back a successfully authenticated message, you're 100% good to go with working on multiple repositories. So working inside of already cloned repositories in this way is very, very, very easy. You just need to change your local Git config credentials. I'll show you how to do that. That's very easy. Also, when cloning, there's just a little bit of a thing that you need to add to actually get it to work. But that's also very easy. I'll show you now. It doesn't take a lot of time, and it still saves you a lot of frustration when actually wanting to switch over to different GitHub accounts. Also, I'm basically doing this video because GitHub is trying to move away from using HTTP connections when cloning and actually accessing your repositories. Since this isn't the most secure way, it's very prone to attacks. So it's not as secure as actually using SSH, which is an encrypted connection to between two networks, which is much safer. Even if you are using it over an insecure network, you still have at least some layer of safety. So at some point, I think probably down the line, GitHub will most likely fully deprecate their HTTP connections and just use SSH, or at least I hope so, because that's just going to be a lot better. And when that happens, obviously people would want to use multiple accounts, and then you can use this video to do so. Okay, now we have done, up until this point, everything on the admin side that we needed to do to have our multiple SSH keys. After you've done this, you don't have to worry about anything. After you've added those keys to your GitHub, you don't have to worry about anything. Then you can fully get cracking with cloning your repositories and actually, just working inside of them with ease and not having to do a lot of config prep every single time you switch. So let's get started by just going to our development directory. Go to Tuesday SSH keys. Very nice. So inside of this, I hope it's empty. Okay, cool, it's empty. Inside of here, we're going to clone our repositories so that I can show you how to clone your repositories after you've added those configs. So as I mentioned, the config works in when a host name is not specified. It works in a first come first serve basis with the connection. So it'll always, if no host name is specified, go into your first identity that you added into that config, and it'll try and connect through that identity file. Whereas if you do explicitly reference a host name when cloning your repository, it'll just use the one that you actually referenced. So that's easy enough to understand practically if we actually do it now. So we are going to go into this account that I created and just this private repository. And here by code, we just want to go into the SSH section, and then we'll copy this link that they gave us. No issues there so far. And then theoretically, if at this point, we know that inside of our config, let's actually open that up. Inside of our config, there we go. Our first one specified is this testing GitHub one, which has this identity file, and this key inside of this identity file references the one that we added to GitHub. So theoretically, if we just paste our git clone, I removed that from the clipboard. Let's copy that again. If I just use git clone and I just paste that original one that I've got straight from GitHub, it's supposed to work. So let's do that. There we go. See, we didn't get any authentication issues. It worked perfectly. But now, the issue, like I said, because it's first come, first serve in that config file, if you do go to your secondary account, so let me just sign in there. Here we go. So now, if I go to this secondary repo that I created, which is a completely different account, but you saw that we did add the hostname inside of our config. But if you just straight up now go, if we list this, you can see our first repo was copied. But if we try and clone our second repo by just using the default clone link that GitHub gave us, we should get an error. There we go. So you see it says we have no rights, and by this point you would be like, what? That does not make any sense. Why do we not have rights? We added it to our config. we added the SSH keys. That doesn't make sense, but actually it does make sense if you look at the URL that Git provided you. So like I said, if you don't specify any host names in your config, it'll go first come first serve. So if you take a close look here at this first repository that we added, I'll highlight it here. You can see it says git@github.com, but there's nothing else really specified there. So you saw when we used SSH test to connect to them, this part was a bit different. It referenced that host name that we had in our config file. So when we actually did clone from this first repository, there was no host name specified. So it just used the first come first serve approach in your config file, which is the exact same thing that this second repository is doing now. It's going first come first serve, goes into that first config, and then it sees, oh, okay, but this identity file doesn't match the key that was added to that repo, so no go, off limits. You get an authentication error. So to solve that, it's very, very easy. You can just go to this section in the SSH URL that you were given from GitHub, and here where you have the host name, github.com. And just to reiterate again, this is only going to be used for cloning when you're working inside of your repo. There's just one small thing that you do, and then you never have to worry about it again. So anyways, for cloning, inside of here, if we have the github.com, we just go dash, and then we reference that host name that we added in our config file. In this case, it was GitHub testing 45, and this is case sensitive, so exactly how you wrote it in your config file is exactly how you need to specify it here. Otherwise it won't work. But now theoretically, if we do this, press enter, there we go, perfect. Now we've just cloned from 2 different repos on 2 different accounts without having any issues with our actual authentication. So just another cool thing, I specifically said using let's do this. Let's clear our console, list everything, and I just want to delete all of these repos. Delete that one. Yes, and also delete the other one. Yes. That's not the command. There we go. Okay, now we have an empty folder here. So now, if we go into this is the coolest part. If we go in, or at least this part makes it a lot easier to navigate the cloning. If we go to our config now for .ssh, we open that up. You saw that I specifically said you need to write your username, but in fact that is not true. You can write whatever you want there. You just need to specify that correct host name when cloning your repository. So I can have this as just first, so that I don't have to remember that very, very long stupid testing name, and this one as second, and then I will be A4 away. Everything would work the exact same way. So now that we changed that, let's go back to our git cloning commands. Okay, so here is our GitHub testing second account. So we by default know that just using this host name will not work, but we specified an easier name just called second, so we can just append second there, and then after running that, boom, no issues at all. Same for, I'm just going to go back to the first, GitHub testing second, GitHub testing first repo, same for here. As we know, if we just use it like this, it'll use the first come first serve approach, which is, it'll just by default work because this is the first identity file we specified for this account. But just to show you, if we use the first host name, it'll also work exactly the same. Now, when actually working inside of these repos, that's a bit different. So what I would suggest is if you do use multiple accounts, um, when with your get config credentials, I would suggest that just remove your global credentials. We do not want them because we are going to be setting up local credentials. Otherwise, you might get a lot of issues when trying to connect to your accounts. It'll try and get the global information if no local ones are set, and then you're going to constantly just get authentication errors, and then you'll get confused. So just the best thing to do is just go get config global user.name. That one is going to be used in your identity for SSH. Clear that. We do not want that. And the email, that one's also going to be used for the identity. Clear that. We do not want that either. We are going to be using local ones. So now we're that's okay. That's cloning and everything with your SSH keys done. That's I feel like up until this point it's pretty easy enough to understand. Now we're going to be getting into actually working inside of your repository, which is a lot simpler. We've already done all the admin, set up all the SSH keys, and now we just need to set up one very small piece of admin per repo. And after you've set that up once locally, don't have to worry about that again. So for our let's go into our testing repo first account. There we go. Okay, so now we're in the first account. Let's just add a random file called test file new. I'm just saying new because I already added the test file. There we go. First go get status. We'll see, okay, there is a new file added. And then we'll go git add that file. There we go, get status. See, we've added that file. And now we'll try and run a commit. Test init added test file. There we go. Boom. Okay, so immediately, because we removed now our global identifiers, GitHub is going to say, okay, we don't know who you are and why you want to actually commit to this repository or push to this repository, anything like that. It's going to ask you to specify configs for that. So let's just go on to, I really don't want to copy all of that stuff again. I don't know it by heart. Let's just go and copy this since we're working on the first account. I'm just going to copy that username. Then we can go, so here it says they want you to specify the global ones, but you know you're using 2 accounts, so don't do that. Say get config local, which means just inside of this repository use these configs. So get config local user.name. I just copied that name. There we go. And then also we'll do the same for email. And lucky enough, that's just adding gmail.com for our case. Here we go. So now if we go get config local user.email, we'll see that our email has been set. Wait, sorry, I think I might be covering the screen there. So if I go get config local user email, you'll see that it has been set. And same for name, you'll see that that has been set. So now, if I actually want to do that commit, I don't want to type all that stuff again. Let me just run the commit through here. There we go. No issues. We've ran the commit. Now also if we go to our log, we can see that our origin has diverged, but we want to push all of the stuff we just created to our origin. You'll see that if you just do git push, you will have no issues with authentication at all. Boom, everything has been set up and sent. If I refresh here, there you go. You can see that. Wait, sorry, this is the second one. I just almost lied to you guys. Let's go back to the first account. Testing GitHub. There we go. So now if we go into this repository, you can see that bam, that account where we just added a file through that account. It just says and in this case because I added one prior to this as a test as well. So yep, it just goes boom. Now we've actually pushed that repo on this account. So we would like to see if we can do the exact same thing for our secondary repo. GitHub testing 45. Just copy that. Cool. Go inside there. Cool. And let's go to their GitHub second account. So now, same thing here. If I do a touch, I'm just going to call this file. That's why not. And then we'll do a git add all, and also a commit for this. Test init added test file. Oh, damn. See, we can't do anything now again because our credentials have not been set. But we know better. We know git config, and we are going to save these credentials locally. User.name, and I copied that. So that's our username. And at gmail.com, that's our email. So if I go boom, that has been set. And just to test, we can go git config local user email in this. So you can see our email has been set to this account on this repo. So if I do go back and go to that first account or repo, and I do also list the email, it'll be that account repo. Cool. So now if we go back to that second account and we go get status just to see what we did, we have that file that we added, and we run that git commit command that we weren't allowed to before. No issues at all. And then also same thing, if we do a log, see it's our references have diverged. So we would like to push that to our repo. So we do that. And boom, there we go. No issues at all. So we just pushed to this repo with our correct account. There you go, see? So now we've just used 2 different SSH keys on our single machine without any hassles. And it might have been a bit of time to set it up, but after you've done that, you are not going to have any issues at all. So yeah, that's basically all the content for this video. I just want to show you guys one more thing, so that you don't stress after you've implemented something like this down the line, when you like push to your repo and it just suddenly says, oh, repo doesn't exist or anything like that. Whenever you get to that case, if it does say, oh, repo doesn't exist, just go ssh add -l and just make sure that those identities for those repos have actually been added, because sometimes if the SSH agent gets shut down or stuff like that, they will be removed. And if that's the case, you know, it's super easy to just add them again. SSH add, and then just wherever that SSH identity is, just go there, and then boom, just add it again. Get oops, whoa, sorry, getting my commands mixed up. SSH add L, and just it'll just be back again. Also, if the SSH agent shuts down and like just the SSH in general doesn't work, also just run this command -s, and then everything will be up and running again with no issues. Then you can push to your repository and all of that stuff. So that's just some things to note, so you don't stress yourself half to death. This should very rarely happen. The SSH agent should be persistent, as well as these SSH add file section. It should rarely disappear, but you know, there's always a case when like adding a package or a new tool through the command line could just like screw some things up. So that's basically just the first place that you would like to check out if something happens that screws up your repositories. Just so that you know that it's usually an easy fix to get back. You don't have to do all the configs over again and all of that stuff. You just need to run your SSH agent again, make sure it's started, and just add those identities, and you would be 100% okay. But yeah, that's all I have to share with you guys today. I think I did go about this a bit quick, so if you guys do have any questions, feel free to just comment them down below. I would 100% get back to answering those as quickly as I can. Also, yeah, if there are any sections that I might have gone through a bit too quickly, just mention that in the comments, and I will just explain those in a bit more detail as well. Or if there are any other scenarios that you guys have that you would like to solve, ask those away, and then we'll get back to you as soon as we can. But yeah, thank you guys for watching this video, and I really hope that it was at least a little bit useful. Yeah, thank you guys. Bye.